Hello, friends, and welcome to Aydt Picks, week number 5. Can't believe we're already at the 5th week of the college football season. It's certainly gone by fast. Before we get into the show, I'm in Gainesville. Gonna watch that game this weekend. Florida's coming off a bye week, so hopefully it'll change our fortunes a little bit. Hopefully Florida's gotten some things right, more things than one. So before I go into the picks, I've started this segment of my show called A History Moment. And as a historian, I dabble here and there in periods of history. I'm going to go a few minutes for your entertainment about what Friday the 13th is. And in particular, as we're in the month of October, I'm going to go into Friday, October 13th, 1307. So, in the Middle Ages, of course, one of the main events in the Middle Ages was the Crusades. And during the Crusades, a lot of the holy orders were formed. The most notorious one, of course, being the Knights Templar. And so the Knights Templar, also known by another name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, they later on became the Knights Templar. They were founded under Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem during the First Crusade. There were 9 knights, and they both took loyalty under the remnants of King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And they made a pledge to defend the Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem. This was 1119. They became recognized in a papal bull 20 years later, in 1139. So the Knights Templar Holy Order, these were warrior monks. They took vows of chastity and poverty. And so as long as you were in the Knights Templar, you couldn't get married, and you were loyal to the Catholic Church and to the Pope. So the Knights Templar were basically the Pope's army. And because they took vows of chastity and poverty, in particular poverty, this is where I'm going with this, they became independently wealthy as an organization. So they would take people's money. They became the first international bankers in terms of they would take money that people had in the Holy Land, and they would transfer it back to Europe through a route of trade networks, and they would hold money. People would owe them money for protection and all that, and so they became independently wealthy, finding a lot of castles and a lot of properties as well. And so after the Crusades, the last crusade in the Holy Land, which was 1292, when the Muslim Mamelukes, which were the Muslim slaves, they basically overtook the Kingdom of Jerusalem. There wasn't much support anymore as there was 200 years prior for it, and a lot of the Holy Land had shifted back to the Muslims. So the last Crusader holdout was in Acre, which is in modern day Israel, and they were basically kicked out to the sea by the Muslims, and from there it's rumored that the Knights Templar took treasures back to Europe, and then one of their last holdouts was Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, which Richard the Lionheart had sold to the Templars back in 1180s, but they had held it for another 100 years, and I think so on until sometime within the 1300s. But the Templars, after the Crusades, they had gone back to Europe. So, hey, Cousin Rob, hope you're doing well, buddy. Miss you, man. Love you. But the Templars, they had gone back to Europe, and like I was saying, their loyalty was to the Pope, and they were a large army of the Pope's soldiers basically on European soil, and they had all these vast castles and estates in like the kingdoms of France, the Kingdom of England, the Holy Roman Empire, which was Germany, and some other areas of Central Europe, and in Spain and in Portugal. And so but because they basically served their purpose, there was no crusade to the Holy Land, so they had nobody to protect. They couldn't make money off of that anymore. And so, I mean, of course, the monasteries and their holdings were independently wealthy, and they weren't really a threat. They just more or less upheld Christian morality, and there were a lot of people that owed them money, including the King of France. So where Friday the 13th comes in is in 1307, King Philip IV of France. I don't know how many of you seen Nightfall, but Nightfall, the mini-series about the Templars, kind of goes hand in hand with the true historical event. So he owed the Templars a lot of money. He was in debt to them, and he didn't want to pay it back. And also he felt that they were a threat because there were more Templars in the Kingdom of France than the actual army of the king. So they outnumbered the French army on French soil, even though they were loyal to the Pope. And so the Pope at that time, Clement V, he was in discussions. He had heard Philip IV of France's concern, and the discussions behind the scene was this angered Philip to the point where so much where Pope Clement V felt that disunity with France was a real threat, and he feared schism from the King of France. This could lead the King of France to potentially break away from the church, or cause friction between the Templars and his own army. And so reluctantly he gave in to the King of France's demands and allowed the King of France to disband the Templars. The Pope, I don't think at the time, realized the extent of what Philip IV of France did on October 13th, 1307. He gathered up all the Templars and their high leadership in France. He declared them as heretics and made up crimes that they were blasphemers, like they were spitting on the crucifixes, partaking in homosexual rituals, and all of these things, hazing that blasphemed the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And so all these charges against him, even though the Pope knew they were false, he feared disunity with France more, which at that time was the most devout Catholic kingdom. And So it was discovered in the Vatican a few years ago that Clement V wrote a document basically stating what I was talking about, that he knew that the Templars were innocent, but he didn't want to cause any friction with the French king. And so Philip IV of France would end up destroying the Templars. He tortured them for confessions, and then their top leaders, the Grand Master of the Templars at the time was a man named Jacques de Molay, and he, in 1314, it took him several years of this guy in prison and being tortured, and then finally they burnt him at the stake. And as he was being burned and being tortured by the flames and dying a severely painful death, he cursed both the King of France and Clement V, the Pope, and both of them died within the next year. And because the Templars were rounded up and destroyed and tortured on Friday, October 13th, 1307, that's where we get Friday the 13th from. Probably went overboard on that, but I'm passionate about it, and I appreciate that, Rob. So on to the picks. Any of you that know college football history, that follow it a lot, appreciate the significance of the FSU-Miami rivalry. Actually, I should call it Miami-FSU because Miami leads the series. FSU probably talks the most crap to their rivals without actually having a winning record against them. They do it to Florida too. But Miami and Florida own Florida State. What surprised me about this rivalry, however, is the fact that Florida State and Miami have been playing longer than Florida's been playing Florida State. And this is largely because of back in that day, Miami and Florida State, Miami was always a small school before national media really took it over and dug in. So they didn't really have much of a following, and they certainly didn't have the prestige and the blue-blooded image that they do in college football today. And that was largely because of Howard Schnellenberger in the 80s and then winning all the national championships and Jimmy Johnson and all them. But Miami was a small private school, and Florida State, first year of their program was 1948, and they were basically the equivalent of NAIA or Division II. And so it was like two really small schools playing each other in the 40s and 50s, because Florida played Miami. I think the first game was like in the 30s, but Florida didn't play Florida State until I think it was 1958. And that was by decree of the governor of the state of Florida, Leroy Collins, because he was from Tallahassee, and as a native Tallahassean, he wanted to see his hometown Seminoles, which when he was growing up, of course, FSU was a women's school, but he wanted to put FSU on the map, and Florida, the University of Florida, was the flagship school. It is today still, but when in college football, Florida was the biggest name. We represented the state of Florida, the University of Florida, so we really put FSU on the map. But the FSU and Miami series has been the most fun rivalry to watch, even when they're not good, because those two teams hate each other. And that game came down to a kick several times, and what's crazy about that is it's always been in Miami's favor, with FSU's kicker missing. I think there was 3 wide rights that determined the outcome of the game, missed field goals, and Miami's always won. It happened in 91, 92, and 2000, and then I think in 2002 as well. So it happened 4 times, but the 4th one was wide left. And every time, like I said, that's just crazy, man. Like, that the end of the game came on a missed kick every time for Florida State. And Florida State lost in every time. You would think that the chances of that were like super slim, and they are. And what's funny is FSU actually won another game versus Florida State from a field goal. It wasn't the last second, but they won it because FSU missed a field goal in like the last 4 minutes. I think that was like 2004 or something. But at any rate, this rivalry is, especially when the teams are good, or is as intense as any other game in college football. Games like this game are what makes college football great. So, with that being said, there's been 3 wide rights that have determined this game, and then a wide left. I'm going to go with wide right 4. The last minute, FSU gets inside of Miami's 40-yard line. They have to kick a 55-yarder to win it. FSU lines up to kick. The kick is up, and it sails wide right. Miami wins. The U wins 21-20, sinking Florida State's playoff dreams. Well, I mean, they could still make it mathematically, but it's not going to look good for them. FSU loses 2 years in a row, and Miami wins on another botched kick by FSU. Moving on. Number 1, Ohio State. I got them over Minnesota by the score of 35-24. I've got number 5, Oklahoma, over Kent State by a score of 44-0. I've got Mississippi State over Texas A&M for my upset pick of the week. Mississippi State is pretty good. It's coming together for that team. So prior to the Tennessee game, I was just thinking, Mississippi State's lucky. Florida that'll probably be an automatic dub for Florida, even though Florida's struggling. But I watched their game versus Tennessee. They're like a play or 2 away from being 5-0. So watch out for Mississippi State. I think they finally get their signature win today under Levy. Saturday under Levy. They beat Texas A&M by the score of 28-27. Penn State coming off that tough loss. James Franklin just can't seem to get over the hump in big games. I think this will be a nice rebound for them going out to Cali playing UCLA. I think Penn State wins in Westwood by the score of 27-6. For the game in the swamp. Man, so much to go into for this one. I think I know at some time it has to end. Florida's scoring streak. But I hope we can go like 200 years and I'm long gone before it does. But I think I've never been more scared of the streak ending any other week besides when we played Georgia, when Muschamp was their coordinator and Kirby Smart was still the head coach. I was scared we were going to get shut out then, and then the Oregon State game, we had a close call that year. But Texas comes in as the number 4 defense in the nation overall. I believe they're even better than the U, and we almost got shut out versus Miami. If it wasn't for that Jaden Ball being a beast on that drive and Lagway converting on the 4th and 3, we probably would have gotten goose-egged by Miami. The rumors have it, however, that Florida's offense is going to take off at some point, according to DJ Lagway. Hopefully this is the week. This is the week we get Dallas Wilson back. I'll be there in the swamp cheering my Gators on. I don't care if we're 0-11 and we play Florida State the last game and are probably going to lose that one. I'm still going to support my Gators because in all kinds of weather we all stick together and we won't back down. We're still the reigning basketball champs, by the way, so I can hold on to that. But I think the players know how important the shutout streak is. Like I said, that's my biggest fear for this year. Like, I already know this might be one of the worst years in Florida football history. I've accepted that. With the optimism that we can get better somehow during this year and have them still fire Napier. It's kind of a double-edged sword because you want Florida to do well, but you don't want Napier to give Florida administration the perceptions that he's doing well enough that he deserves another chance. So it's a hard thing to say. But with that being said, I think the scoring streak is important enough to the players and the coaches that we'll at least get a field goal. I think our defense continues to keep us in the game. I think this is a close game for like 3 quarters, and then Texas pulls away and late in the 4th. I'm thinking like maybe like a 10-3 game until the end of the 3rd quarter, and then Texas will add 2 late touchdowns. I'll say DJ throws a pick 6 and Arch gets a drive together, short field. But I think number 9 Texas beats Florida by the score of 24-3. Buckle up, Gator fans, and I hope we can get loud at the Swamp. That's what I hope. Show Texas why the Swamp is the most feared place to play in the country and the toughest place to get out alive. I've got number 10, Alabama. They impressed me more than any team last week going into Sanford Stadium and kicking Georgia in the teeth and ending their home winning streak. Got number 10, Alabama over a sneaky, tricky, much improved Vanderbilt team by a score of 35-17. Vanderbilt's ranked number 16, and they're 5-0 for the first time since like World War II. Got number 11, Texas Tech over Houston by a score of 45-16. Got number 12, Georgia over pitiful Kentucky by a score of 21-3. I've got number 14, Iowa State going on the road to Cincinnati. Nice job by that Coach Campbell. He's turned them into a competitive team year in and year out. I think they beat Cincinnati by the score of 34-10. Number 20, Michigan, plays at home in Ann Arbor versus Wisconsin. I think they beat Wisconsin by the score of 31-20. I've got number 21, Notre Dame Fighting Irish over Boise State by the score of 49-17. I've got number 22, Illinois over Purdue by the score of 22-17. I've got number 23, BYU over West Virginia by a score of 27-10. Man, West Virginia's struggling. Then again, it's their first year having Rich Rod back in the system. So I think they'll be better eventually. Number 24, Virginia, hot off of their win versus Florida State. I think they'll beat Louisville by a score of 38-27. For my bonus pick of the week, we've got the Service Academies game here. We've got Navy playing Air Force. I've got Navy over Air Force by a score of 31-3. Running that triple option, as the Service Academies do. For my other D1 Florida schools, I've got FIU over UConn by the score of 24-21. I've got Kansas over Scott Frost and UCF by a score of 35-21. I've got Florida Atlantic, the Fighting Willie Taggarts over Rice by a score of 27-26. And I've got South Florida Bulls over Charlotte. Not Texas, but UCF Bulls by a score of 28-7. This concludes the picks. Now I'm going to talk more about the Billy Napier saga, since I'm right here, ground zero. My dad basically lives on the UF's campus. That's where I grew up. So from what I hear, Napier, there's been no call on Napier, nothing discussed. They're either keeping it under wraps, or Scott Strickland's the most delusional person in the United States. He's going to screw around and get fired if he's not careful, because even though Gator fans are loyal, eventually if we keep sucking, that's going to take a toll on attendance. I don't care how good anybody is. If you're paying $200 and traveling from, especially those that travel from like Tampa or Orlando, some even come from Miami because you got a lot of rich Florida alum down there. If you're coming up here, spending your free time on the weekend, spending $200 a ticket to watch a comedy show on the field, stink it up, are you going to want to come and watch Florida get embarrassed, drive 5 or 6 hours? No, you're not, because that's going to embarrass you. And so people aren't going to be wanting to pay money to see a laughingstock team. Even though we're loyal to Florida, it's just, I'm being real. Like, that's not the case for everybody, but I'm telling you, like, once those seats become empty, Strickland's going to feel it, and the pressure's going to be on him. If he pisses off the wrong boosters, especially if he waits too long and doesn't fire Billy and misses on the right guy, the pressure's going to be on his job. So I'm for getting rid of Strickland as it is. Some of you have seen my rants on Facebook, like what I've posted and whatnot. Because even though he got lightning in a bottle with Todd Golden, like his freaking other hires have been garbage for the most part, and some of them have led to scandals, and that's not a good look on the University of Florida. And for those of us proud of our alma mater, our alumni, we don't want to be lumped in with that Penn State garbage or any kind of black eye to our proud program. And so why on earth they would sign him to an extension, especially when I don't want his greasy paws all over our stadium with his renovation project. He's probably going to screw it up like Florida State did theirs. So, like I said, if you're going to take Billy down, you might as well take Scott down too, especially if he keeps on refusing. You got to go to the root of the problem sometimes, you know what I mean? With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed my picks. Please click like and subscribe on YouTube. I'm going to load this later, probably here in the next hour or so. You don't have to watch the whole thing, especially if you viewed it here. But just please go on YouTube, click like and subscribe. It helps my show grow and me to realize my dreams. Aydt signing off. God bless.